Today on Inside Utah Politics, addressing homelessness in Utah's capital city. The Pioneer Park Coalition recently rolling out its own plan, what they say would be the best steps moving forward. Plus, a group of Republican lawmakers visiting the southern border, what they are saying as they are set to take control of the U.S. House.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glen. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Rick Graham. He is co-chair of the Pioneer Park Coalition, here to discuss the organization's plan to address homelessness in Salt Lake City. Rick, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Start off with the Pioneer Park Coalition and some background for viewers that may not be familiar with it. Tell us a little bit about what the organization is all about and what you do.
Pioneer Park Coalition is a coalition of local business, citizens, community folks, residents, downtown business leaders that has assembled to address issues related to homelessness, specifically or initially in the Pioneer Park area. It was formed in about 2014. Since then, the role and the responsibility has grown into a much broader homeless initiative. But the Pioneer Park itself is still one of our main pillars of what can we do as a coalition and community to help revitalize the park.
And when you talk about what you can do, what are some things that you specifically do to try to achieve that mission?
Our mission is to be advocates. Our mission statement is kind of wordy, but basically it says we are the advocates for homeless people, those that are impaired and can't have a voice or don't have a voice for themselves. And so our goal and mission is to be advocates for them, find solutions and opportunities to create an environment that they can thrive in, and also work with the local community to help that happen.
Talk about the way you see the homeless situation in downtown Salt Lake City right now from your perspective.
Thank you. I think anyone can see in any part of Salt Lake City, no matter where you live, that we have a challenge with homelessness. We have people on the street. We have people at intersections begging for money. We have unsanctioned camps and camping out on streets, in doorways, on businesses, in open spaces, and almost any place that doesn't have a structure, and even in places with structure. The homeless population, both sheltered and unsheltered, is growing in Salt Lake City and the surrounding areas. What also is happening is we have a very active and determined group of individuals, philanthropists, government agencies, municipal agencies, other types of service providers that are doing a great deal to help provide services for this. So we're seeing the growth, but we're also seeing wonderful services that are happening as well.
I agree with you. Everyone takes a look at the situation and can see something needs to be done. But there's a lot of debate over what specifically should be done to address this.
Yeah.
Last month, your organization rolled out a plan that you think should be followed. Dig into that for us.
Thank you. The prevailing notion in the homelessness community, and this just is not in Salt Lake City, but throughout the nation, is that homelessness generally could be solved by putting people in homes. It's a housing first type of concept. That's certainly part of the solution, but it isn't the whole solution. And that there has to be additional services and attention focused on just housing. We rolled out a month ago our homelessness plan, suggestions and ideas to reduce homelessness and reduce crime in Salt Lake City. It's a three-pronged approach, and that approach is provide those that are seeking homelessness services a structure of complete wraparound services that help them and enrich their lives.
And when you talk about services, we're talking about treatment programs and education programs, that sort.
That in addition to housing and to shelters. It starts there, but at these shelters and these facilities, it's just not a roof over the head that they need. They need support. And it is substance abuse, mental health treatment, employment help, other factors that they do not have resources or the capacity to find for themselves. Bring them to a shelter, bring them to a resource center, and help them gain some additional in services and what they can do.
Okay, real quick, you know as well as everyone else that that new plan rolled out where we got rid of the road home and we made these 3 resource centers. So are you suggesting those aren't working appropriately?
Not at all. They're working appropriately. Our vision and view is that there's more, there's always more, but there's more that can be done to support the homeless. And the second part of our approach is we've got to enforce the law. We've got to stop the crime. We've got to, which follows homeless people and follows homeless locations all over.
And something you alluded to earlier was the camping. You believe that should be enforced as well?
Absolutely. Salt Lake City has laws on the book, legitimate laws that say street camping is against the law. It is a challenge. We need more enforcement. We need alternatives. When we talk about enforcement, we don't say they need to be thrown in jail. We need alternatives to jail. Jail is not the place to put them. We need alternatives. We need transitional types of alternatives. But we have to start by enforcing the law, and we have to do something in Salt Lake City to get the street camping under control.
And one thing you've suggested is a camping location, a camp for those struggling with homelessness. Where would that be?
It is true. We support, through our study, through good practice from other states and cities that have the same types and even larger problems in Salt Lake City, of the idea of sanctioned camps. A sanctioned camp is an area that is located, it's controlled, it's street outside camping, but it's in a controlled environment. At a sanctioned camp, services are provided. Shelters could even be provided. That's a notion that certainly can look at. But other services like restroom facilities, a place to eat, getting services for mental health, drug addiction, getting services and transportation to employment and things like that. So it's a very structured camp, but it is collecting, rather than being on the street and living in the gutters and living in doorways and the despicable environment that some of these needy people have, we're putting them in a sanction. Where that goes is still up to debate. It needs to be a large area. Interesting enough, we are we're working with the state of Utah, and we know that is something that our state homeless organization committee is looking at. We are proponents of that. Look forward to opportunities to discuss.
Okay, we have about a minute left. We're moving through this quickly. The third element of your plan.
The third element is accountability. It's kind of a hard word, but it's responsibility. And that is, those that are homeless need to bear responsibility for their actions. But those that are service providers, funders, governments as well, need to be accountable and make sure that what we are doing is being successful. The state invests over $300 million a year. We need to make sure, through accountable factors, through tracking data, having a complete system of tracking across all activities, how that money is being spent, and make sure that that wonderful investment that is incredible is actually producing positive results. We believe it is, we know it is, to the extent there's more to be discovered.
Okay, we've run out of time. I wish we had more because there were a couple of things I wanted to get into as well. The legislative session coming up, really quick, that's something that you are all a part of. If anyone at home is interested in learning more about your organization or getting involved, how can they do that?
They can do that by volunteering. The PPC has over several hundred members. There is a website, pioneerpark.co. The website describes opportunities to get involved, to be a part of the organization, and also information to help you better understand the nature of what's going on here in Salt Lake City.
All right, Rick, appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks.
Still to come, the election results have been certified during the week. Our panel will be weighing in on the major messages and themes from the midterm. But first, President Biden's billion-dollar proposal to help fund Ukraine is meeting some roadblocks. We hear from both sides after the break. Republican Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and a delegation of Republicans traveling to El Paso this week to tour the border and meet with Border Patrol agents. McCarthy says addressing the border is his top priority when Republicans take the majority in the House in January. Washington correspondent Anna Warnicki has more.
We have lost operational control of our southern border.
In a trip to El Paso, Texas on Tuesday, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy vowed to hold the people he blames for the border crisis responsible.
Just last week, Secretary Mayorkas testified under oath that yes, the border is secure. I'm here to tell you it is not.
McCarthy says the Biden administration is failing and called on Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to resign immediately.
If Secretary Mayorkas does not resign, House Republicans will investigate every order, every action, and every failure. Will determine whether we can begin impeachment inquiry.
McCarthy says when Republicans take control of the House in January, he plans to physically move the congressional hearings from Washington to the border.
I urge the Biden administration, please work with the House Republican leadership to secure this border because lives are on the line.
But White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre fired back, calling McCarthy's trip a political stunt.
He goes down there and he does a political stunt like many Republicans do, that we have seen them do, but he actually is not putting forth a plan.
In Washington, I'm Anna Warnicki.
The GOP divide in Congress continues to grow over whether to approve more funding for Ukraine's war effort against Russia. The Biden administration recently requesting about $38 billion in additional assistance, but some conservative Republicans say they will not support it. Washington correspondent Jesse Tenor reports on the debate.
I don't know that Ukraine has much of an incentive to end this war.
Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz told News Nation Tuesday he doesn't want another dollar going to Ukraine's war effort.
It's a bizarre circumstance where we don't even have a budget for our own government right now, but we are funding the budget of Ukraine's government.
Gaetz joined a group of conservative House Republicans last week to push back on the Biden administration's request for nearly $38 billion in additional economic and humanitarian aid. Alabama Congressman Barry Moore is concerned about the cost and oversight.
It creates problems, it creates corruption, and it's not good for the American taxpayer.
This group will have more influence on Capitol Hill come January as the GOP takes a narrow majority in the House. That's why leaders in both parties want to approve more Ukraine funding now as part of a year-end government funding bill. Supporters in Congress point to Ukraine's recent victories on the battlefield as a reason to ramp up funding, not pull back. And leaders on the world stage, like NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, shared the same message.
If we want an outcome which is acceptable for Ukraine, the best way of achieving that is to provide military support to Ukraine.
On Tuesday, U.S. officials announced they're ready to distribute $4.5 billion Congress already approved. And if lawmakers greenlight the White House's new request, the total U.S. commitment to Ukraine could top $100 billion since Russia invaded. In Washington, I'm Jesse Tenor.
Coming up, the election results are now certified. Our panel breaks down the final outcomes. Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Representative Carol Spackman Moss and State Representative Jordan Teuscher. Glad to have both of you on the show. Let's get right into the election results. They were officially certified during the week. And the race we were talking about really all year long was at the top of the ticket, the race for Senate. We saw this fluctuate between 10 to 14 points during the two-week canvassing period. Senator Lee ends up officially winning by 10 points. Representative Spackman Moss, let's start with you. What, if any, message does that send? Because it's closer than any other race he's been in.
Well, I think they picked the candidate. McMullen did really well, and I think he was experienced, and he certainly caused Mike Lee to campaign more, harder, more appearances. And I know people got really tired of their commercials, but I thought it was a good thing for democracy to have a strong candidate running against Senator Lee, and he did come closer than anyone, even a Democrat, has in many, many years.
Representative Teuscher, let's bring you in. Do you see that as sending any message to the now three-term senator?
Well, I think generally, if you look at the race, we learned two major things. One, Utah is a solidly conservative red state, and that's not changing. In a lot of ways, you can look at this Senate race as really just a second primary. You had two Republicans on the ticket that were fighting, one that was maybe a little more moderate, one that was conservative. But in the end, 10 points is a landslide. I think the second thing is really looking at the strategy that Democrats had and whether we're going to see this in the future. In a lot of ways, I don't think it was a winning strategy for Democrats. You didn't have anyone at the top of the ticket that could really pound in those Democratic principles and sell the Biden agenda, which may have had an effect on down-ballot races.
Okay, that's an interesting point I want to dig a little bit more into with you, Representative Spackman Moss. Will Democrats ever go that route again where they bypass their own nominee in favor of an independent?
I don't think so. I think it was an experiment, maybe a failed experiment, but albeit an experiment that was interesting to see it play out, because I did see a lot of data that showed that there was a rather thin path to winning, but I would much prefer to see a Democrat because that person's talking about democratic values and things that matter to all of us. And Evan McMullin was talking about, he was the alternative, not so much specific values and issues, which I think it's important for voters to hear from a Democrat so they can make judgments on their own.
Representative Teuscher, you bring up the fact that the 10-point win is still a big one, and it is. For Utah standards, though, it's really close for a statewide race when you take a look back at the last few decades. So when you take a look at this independent run, I know through sources that other big names in Utah politics were looking at that as like a beta test to see how an independent candidate could do. Do you see any path in the future to independent candidates in our state?
Yeah, I would say not anytime soon. Certainly the demographic of the state is changing, and we may see something different in 10 years. But I think the closeness of the race really came down to the fact that you had two conservative candidates. I think you could argue how conservative each one was, but you didn't have a Democrat at the top of the ticket. And had you had a Democrat at the top of the ticket, they wouldn't have lost by just 10 points. It would have been a much bigger margin. And so I think maybe the message for Democrats is they need to find more moderate candidates to put up and not try to sell such a hard. I mean, if you look in 2014, that was a pretty liberal candidate they put up, and you had a much bigger 40-point margin there. But still, I don't see any path for a candidate that runs independent in the future.
Representative Spackman Moss, your thoughts on an independent candidate, but also what Representative Teuscher just brought up. Do you agree that the Democrats need to look to more moderate candidates in the future?
Well, we have had moderate candidates for congressional races. Look at Ben McAdams. He's moderate. We didn't get a chance to see Cale Weston. He's a fine person. We didn't get enough opportunity to see what issues he would have focused on. But I really think the third-party candidates are not going to succeed ever in Utah. And I was really dismayed that in a few cases in legislative races, the Utah United Party took enough votes away from one of our candidates who might have won that race. And I think it's just an exercise in futility, and it hurts candidates on both sides. I mean, we have a strong two-party system in this country, and those who think they can start a third party, I think, are not realistic at all. I don't think it's a good idea.
Let's move to the State House. This will hit close to home for both of you. Democrats losing 3 seats, one essentially through redistricting, and then 2 incumbents losing their elections in Salt Lake County. Representative Teuscher, let's start with you. What impact does that have with you being part of the majority now growing in the State House?
Well, while I'm thrilled for the 2 new members of our caucus, to be quite honest, I don't think you'll see a major shift in going from a 59-seat majority caucus to a 61-seat majority caucus. It's still a supermajority. I think the bigger shift that you're going to see in the majority caucus is with some of these races that happened back in June. Some of the former colleagues that either retired or were replaced during competitive primaries that were replaced by much more conservative people. You think about Trevor Lee coming in, Katie Hall coming in, Tim Jimenez coming in. They're replacing much more moderate candidates, and they have more conservative-leaning views. And so I think generally our caucus will turn a little more conservative as we move forward.
Representative Spackman Moss, your thoughts on losing 3 colleagues in your minority caucus?
Well, it's really unfortunate. They were all 3 wonderful legislators, and thankfully Suzanne Harrison won that seat for the countywide position on the council. But when a party gets a majority, such a large majority, it's not the best for the people of Utah. With a supermajority, I think the bigger the majority, the more factions they break up into, and I don't think it's the best kind of governing. And I'm concerned about the more radical candidates, the radical right, those who got in over majority or moderate Republicans who we all work together in so many ways. Democrats are successful because we have good relationships with Republicans, and we come together on issues that affect all Utahns and benefit them. So I just think I'm wary of it. I hope I'm wrong, but I think it will be more divisive and we'll have less of that cooperation. And the public wants to see us get things done for the benefit of people, not message bills, but substantive bills that address inflation and taxes and gasoline prices and everyday things in education that affect everyone.
Representative Teuscher, you bring up the idea of the majority caucus becoming more conservative, but we also saw points during that election that you referred to where we saw the speaker, the majority leader kind of distance themselves from those candidates you talk about. So how's that dynamic going to play out?
Yeah, I think that was really specific to the issues that were going on. It had nothing to do with the general philosophy that conservative values are really leading Utah in the right direction. And so I think the leadership that we'll see in the House will continue to push those things, and maybe some of the issues that we had in the last session, like school choice, there'll be more support across the caucus and within the House to push those issues forward.
Okay, we have a minute left. I want to give each of you 30 seconds on this. When you take a look at the House congressional races in Utah, the closest one was like 28 points. We used to have at least one competitive district in Utah. Representative Spackman Moss, do we even have that anymore?
No, and it's a result of the most egregious example of gerrymandering I've seen in my lifetime. It's really unfortunate because, again, I think the people of Utah are moderate, they're more centrist, and you can have somebody on the Democratic side and on the Republican side that reflect those values, as we did with Ben McAdams and others in the past.
Okay, I'm sorry we're running out of time, but I want to give Representative Teuscher a few seconds on that as well.
I agree with Representative Moss in the fact that they aren't going to be competitive in the future, but I think that's a reflection of our state. We're a conservative state. We're going to have conservative congressmen representing us in Washington. And I think what's really important with that is that we could have gerrymandered in a more competitive seat, but that's not what the state is. The state is a solidly conservative state, and that's what we'll see.
We are going to have to unfortunately end it on that note. Really appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for being here with us this week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now to look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The general legislative session is coming up. It begins on Tuesday, January 17th and goes through Friday, March 3rd. Governor Spencer Cox will deliver the State of the State address on Thursday, January 19th. Make sure to connect with me by email or on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.